hometown historian, Jonathan Miller here. We're in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. We're at the site of the Lebanon Catholic School. It actually got shut down a couple years ago. We're going to visit this old mansion, which is one of the most historic houses here in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. It's called the Donoughmore Mansion. This was built probably around the time of 1857 when the Dudley Iron Works or iron furnace was bought by Robert H. Coleman. And they built this mansion specifically for the Iron Master. This building, when Lebanon Catholic bought the property in 1949, was used at the start of the school as they built the high school. I believe the high school, as it presently stands, was finished in 1959. And this was used, I guess, for the high school for a while, and then eventually became a nunnery. And then obviously that ended once the school shut down and it was sold to a developer. So I guess at some point they're going to develop this this property into housing and I guess some other amenities as well. Unfortunately, there is talk of they may rip down this old mansion. So when the exact date was when it was built, I'm not really sure, but it was built for a David S. Hammond, who was actually quite a unique individual as a colonel in the military. He actually got his start in the iron business at 16, got an apprenticeship. His father was good friends with James Buchanan, who was the 15th President of the United States. And they named this the Donoughmore Mansion because the Coleman family had a connection. They were Irish heritage and ancestry, and I guess they were in the Donoughmore region of Ireland. But that's why they called this the Donoughmore Mansion. And they actually changed it. The original family that owned this iron furnace was, I believe, 1855. It was the Dudley family. So it was called the Dudley Iron Furnace or Dudley Iron Works. And then when Robert Coleman bought it, he changed it to Donoughmore Iron Furnace. And it was a pretty well run furnace. It put out quite a bit of tonnage. And then changed ownership, I guess, over a couple different years. And then they eventually, I think it was 1890, it went out of business. And the Hammond family actually lived here through 1900. The David S. Hammond, he lived to 1897, and then he passed away, and I guess they lived there for 3 more years. And then the Patches family wound out moving in here because David Hammond had been the president of the Cornwall Railroad, and so he had continued his operation, like moving throughout the company. And then the Patch family, they wound up moving in here. Let me get my paper here. It was an Alexander M. Patch. And actually, another thing I want to make a note of, the Hammond, he was actually a direct descendant of George Stites. He was the founder of Lebanon, so he had a lot of connections, and that sort of got him in, and Coleman really appreciated him. He was a manager at the Cornwall Iron Furnace, and when he bought this iron furnace, he decided to put David S. Hammond here in charge of that and built this home specifically for him. But in 1900, the Patch family with Captain Alexander M. Patch, he wound up buying this, and he wound up moving here because he wound up being a successor to David Hammond as the president of the Cornwall Railroad. Patch family is actually quite renowned. His 2 sons, Lieutenant General Alexander M. Patch Jr. and Major General Joseph D. Patch. Alexander M. Patch Jr. was actually known as Sandy. And a cool note too, well, it's not a cool note for him, but the Captain Alexander M. Patch, he actually he lost a leg in a fight with a Comanche man. I guess it would be out west. But the son, Alexander M. Patch Jr., he was actually given a hero's welcome after World War II. He and his brother both served, I guess, in World War I. His brother, Joseph, was actually a major general, and I believe he was in command of Fort Lewis, which I believe is near Washington, D.C. But Alexander M. Patch was a lieutenant general, and he actually played a vital role in the Guadalcanal campaign as part of the South Pacific campaign. But then in 1949, this home, I guess it was sold to several different groups, including, like, I guess the American Legion, who were originally wanted to make a memorial park in honor of the Patches family, but also make a Legion post here, which that sort of fell through and never came to be. But eventually in 1949, Lebanon Catholic wound up buying this property, and the rest is history. Thanks, everybody. So this is Lieutenant General Alexander M. Patch, and this is Joseph D. Patch. So once again, I'll say that Patch family played a vital role in World War II. For both brothers. The father had quite an intriguing military history, and they lived in this mansion for quite a few years and were renowned in Lebanon. Favorite family. Thanks, everybody. Hi, so we are here at where Donoughmore Station would have been. Donoughmore Station would have been right over here, because this is where the railroad tracks would have been. I'll throw up a picture just quick, and you can take a peek at that, what the station originally looked like. So at the top of this picture, you will see the original station that was torn down eventually in 1974 for the Cornwall Railroad. And the pictures below just sort of show where the tracks ran and the original office buildings that we were visiting here shortly. And that was the station that was actually demolished in 1974. This, a lot of people would have thought was the actual station, but it's in fact the general offices of the Cornwall Railroad, which we'll talk about their history, but I'll give you a little bit of a view here. It's now housed by Mellow Vending right here in our Lebanon Catholic, and it was named Donoughmore Station because it was named after the iron furnace that was here. It was originally Dudley Iron Furnace. Just a beautiful building. I always admired this, like the stonework and the age of this building, but it is not a rail station. It's actually a general offices. I wanted to pause there for a second because there's somebody coming by and people get a little weirdy about that type of stuff, but really neat little building here. But this housed the Cornwall Railroad, which was actually a much earlier railroad of the Coleman family, specifically for the Cornwall Iron Furnace, because they had a rail line that was about 6 miles that went from Cornwall to the Union Canal. You just see like the brickwork and everything is just, along with the stone, is just really impressive. I'd never been next to this building before, and like I said, I always sort of assumed it was a station, but found out quite a bit differently. But the Dudley Iron Works actually started in 1855. Robert Coleman bought them in 1857 for $85,000, and he wound up placing one of his managers, David Hammond, in charge of the iron furnaces. We're going to walk down here just a little bit. I don't think there's anything left of the iron furnaces. That's probably been gone for a long time, but they actually shut down in 1900, and I guess at some point Robert Coleman had actually sold it off to, I believe, his sisters, and then someone else bought it, and eventually it went defunct. But this was actually the only station that the Cornwall Railroad actually owned itself, because originally they did a lot of things where they had right of way, where the different railroad companies, because there were so many of them, like these different small railroad companies, they would allow each other to use right of use of their tracks to be able to go from place to place. You know, some of them were more of a freight-based company, which this would have been more of, and then others were more passenger traffic. But the Cornwall Railroad actually ran out of the Reading Railroad Station that we visited earlier in the American Rail Stations series. But we'll go down through here and we'll talk a little bit more about Cornwall Railroad and the Cornwall and Lebanon Railroad and just some of the oddities with that, because it was actually owned by the same family, just different people within that family. This is the Lebanon Valley Rail Trail. They actually take a lot of the old rail lines, especially like the Cornwall rail lines, and wound up making them into rail trails for people to hike on and that type of stuff. Let me just quick pause here. All right, so as we walk along here, I'll talk about this, give a little bit of a different viewpoint. But they actually, the original Cornwall Railroad was actually called the North Lebanon Railroad, and that was, I started in 1850. It was like incorporated at that point. They didn't start operating actually until about 1855, which that actually looks sort of like it could be where some stonework originally was. Any original iron furnace there. If you look back in there, I don't know if you guys can see back in there. I can hardly see back in there, but maybe that's because they said it was just to the west of where the tracks would have been, which is where the iron furnace would have been, which would have made sense to have it like right there, because then you could offload the iron, because they just made like the iron, they got the iron ore out of the slag or whatever you want to call it, to get the iron. And then the forges, like we talked about, Union Forge, Hopewell Forges, and Speedwell Forges, which were all owned by the Coleman family, their iron dynasty. They had bought out the Grubb family, and who were the first iron dynasty in this area. They were the original owners of Cornwall Iron Furnace, and I believe he named that town Cornwall because that's where the Grubb family was actually from. Besides those stones there, that's all I saw. But anyways, they eventually switched the name to the Cornwall Iron Furnace, and that was to take that 6-mile first track that they built, was to be able to take their iron ore from the iron furnace in Cornwall here to Lebanon, where the Union Canal came through. But unfortunately, within the family, Robert Coleman, I believe the owners were George and William Coleman, and their cousin Robert Coleman decided in 1883 that he would like to get into the rail system. This quite perturbed the family, because it was, to them, they looked at it as a stab in the back, because now you have two stations or two railways competing over the same iron ore, and they had a lot of lawsuits, right of ways. Like, these two companies did not like each other at all. And when we visited the Cornwall and Lebanon rail station, which is right across the street from the Reading Railroad station there on 8th Street in Lebanon, that was actually partially built for the Coleman family as their personal rail station, because they were one of the richest families in America at that stage. And they decided that they would also have a retreat, sort of like, you know, a really nice area for people to go on vacation or whatever, like those day trips. And they built it up in Mount Gretna. So their rail station went from, I think, as far south as Conewago Township in Lancaster, and then went through like Mount Gretna. And there was actually a railway there that they owned as well that went up, I believe, Governor Dick Mountain. So it was a very unique station, or a unique railroad. They had all that different type of cool stuff that it would do passenger traffic and freight traffic. But they went through numerous lawsuits of seeing who would have right of way to the Cornwall Iron Furnace. And the sad thing is, like, both sides of that family, they both owned major parts of that ironworks. So it was just, it's one of those things that happens in families, I guess. Like, you know, you're rich, you have stuff like that happen. They built that station, the Cornwall and Lebanon station in Lebanon was built 1885, and that's actually the Cornwall Railroad. For their passenger traffic, they would run out of that rail station, the Reading Railroad station. They also had sort of their own sort of getaway place, which was called Penryn Park. We will visit there at some point, because the station there, the station house, it's not very big. It's just a tiny little thing. That actually was sort of their getaway point as well. So they competed in every way, and they actually said they went so far as to they would have races from Cornwall to Lebanon. It's quite unsafe apparently, but there's a lot of nonsense that happened there. But it's an interesting history of Cornwall and Lebanon Railroad and the Cornwall Railroad. Now the Cornwall Railroad, from what I've read, actually lasted till I think the 1960s, until they eventually got absorbed into, I believe, the Reading Railroad. But Cornwall and Lebanon was not as fortunate, because Robert Coleman made some bad investments and some over investments in Florida railways. So in 1913, he wound up having to basically sell off his company to debtors. And I guess over a period of like 5 years, from 1913 to 1918, Pennsylvania Railroad basically went in and bought all the shares until they owned the company outright. and they got absorbed then in 1918 into the Pennsylvania Railroad. So their history was 35 years, whereas the Cornwall Railroad actually lasted over 100 years. So in the end, the first company was much better, well run. Even though Robert Coleman was actually quite a savvy businessman, he did make some mistakes in that regard and ultimately wound out ending his company. It's just overinvestments in railways that were not well run. So, and that was sort of what happened back then. But this is the Donoughmore Station. Has quite an important history. A lot of things, like we did a video earlier about talking about the station itself, the Donoughmore Mansion, the ironworks that were here. So there's a lot of cool stuff in this area that was well worth filming and talking about. So with that, I'll say thank you once again for coming along on this journey. I'm going to put some pictures up as well of the Patches family. I'm working my way back into that, being able to use pictures and just making sure I'm citation things correctly. So you'll probably at the end of this video, you'll wind up seeing like a credits type thing. So I'm just figuring this out right now, but this is something I wanted to film for a while because it's a really cool place, really neat looking building. I'll put some pictures up on Instagram, that type of stuff. So with that, I want to say thank you, and as always, we'll see you about town.